Okay, girls, today we're going to go on to lesson 2, and we are going to be looking at the reasons why there was a plantation. So in the last lesson, we looked at the different groups of people that were living in Ireland around the 1500s. And today we're going to talk about why Ulster was planted. So we're going to learn about what is a plantation. Okay, so in this lesson we will learn how Henry VIII controlled Ireland, and we're going to be looking at the plantations of Laois, Offaly and Munster. Just very briefly, okay, just as a little bit of background of information, we're looking at Laois, Offaly and Munster, but you don't really need to know them in details. Background information. Okay, so Henry VIII then, we've already learned about Henry VIII. We talked about him during the Reformation. So we learned that during the Reformation, he started up his own church, the Church of England. And we looked at the fact that he had lots of wives and he wanted to get divorced. And I think what we've learned from him so far is that he liked to have a lot of power and he liked to have a lot of control. And he, as well as trying to control the church that we've already learned about, he also wanted to control Ireland. Okay. Now, we saw the last day that there were a number of powerful families living in Ireland and controlling different parts of Ireland. Some of those were the Gaelic Irish, who have been there for centuries, such as the O'Neills and the O'Donnells. And then there were also groups of Anglo-Irish or Normans that had come across from England hundreds of years beforehand. Now, there was one very powerful family called the Fitzgeralds, and they were based around Kildare. And Henry VIII wanted to try and reduce their power. He also wanted to prevent the French or the Spanish from using Catholic Ireland as a base. So he had brought in his own Church of England religion, and he was afraid that the strong Catholic countries of Europe would try to basically gang up on him. So the other very powerful Catholic countries were France and Spain, and he was afraid that they would join with Ireland and use Ireland as a backdoor to attack England from the west side. And he also wanted to introduce his changes in religion to Ireland. So he wanted to try and establish the Church of England in Ireland as well. So those are the reasons why he wanted to plant Ireland, which means he wanted to settle it. He wanted to send people over to come and live in Ireland. So, as I said, the Fitzgeralds of Kildare were a very powerful family, and you can see here are some of the famous buildings that date back as far as the time of the Fitzgeralds. So you might be familiar with some of these buildings. For example, Leinster House there on the top right, that's where the Dáil is. Carton House in Maynooth is a hotel. The Ireland rugby team often train there. If anybody's interested in rugby, you might be familiar with Carton House. So you can see the Fitzgeralds were a very powerful and very wealthy family, and Henry VIII wanted to try and reduce their power. Okay, so during the plantations then, rebellious chiefs were defeated and their land was taken over. So any Irish chiefs or any Irish families that were trying to rebel against the king, he defeated them and he took over their land. The land was going to be given to loyal settlers or planters. So people that were loyal to the king would be given land to live on. The planters would use English law. Okay, so we learned the last day about the difference between English law and Brehon law. And all of these new settlers that were going to settle in Ireland were going to be using English law. They're also going to be using the English language and English customs. Okay, so they weren't going to use any Irish traditions or Irish language. The planters were going to defend their land against the Irish. So it was up to these planters who had been given land to protect that land and make sure that they weren't going to be attacked. So guys, as we're going through the PowerPoint, you can take down the notes off the PowerPoint here into your copies. Now, the plantation of Laois and Offaly. So The first areas that Henry VIII tried to plant or tried to send settlers over was around the Midlands of Ireland, Laois and Offaly. You don't need to take this down, okay, girls? This is just kind of background information. Now, this plantation failed because not enough planters came and the Irish kept attacking the settlers. So not enough people came over from Britain to live in Ireland. And the ones who did come over, they were being attacked by the Irish. And so it was a failure. Okay, the next one then. The Plantation of Munster. Okay, so this one was a little bit more successful. So this was around Cork and Kerry. So the settlers or the planters came over from England and they got different amounts of land, okay, depending on who they were. And it was the hope that they would be able to defend against the Spanish. So at this time, Henry VIII is now gone, and it is his daughter Elizabeth who is the Queen of England, and they're still worried that the Spanish are going to come over and attack. So they try to send people over to live in Munster to settle the land. But again, this was a failure. Not enough people came over, and again, the Irish attacked them. But there were new towns built by these settlers. So Bandon in County Cork and Lismore in County Waterford, they were built by the settlers. They also brought over some new farming methods, and they began to trade. Okay, so this was more successful than the Laois Offaly plantation, but it still wasn't very successful. Walter Raleigh, that's the picture of him there, he was one of the most famous people who came over, one of the most famous planters. He got some land and he set up the town of Youghal in County Cork. So you might be familiar with some of these places. Walter Raleigh is very famous. You might know his name. He is the person who brought over the potato to Britain and then obviously to Ireland as well. So the potato we learned already when we were talking about colonialism and we were talking about the exploration of South America. The potato comes from South America and Walter Raleigh brought it over here. And he was given land in East Cork and during the Plantation of Munster. So girls, Plantation of Laois Offaly and Plantation of Munster, just some background information. You don't really need to know it in detail, okay? Okay, so guys, we're going to pause at this point. I want you to now click on the video link. There's a video link there on your Google Classroom, and it is for a little video clip about the plantations. So I want you to watch that video clip, and if you have your skills book, there are questions on page 75 and 76 that I want you to answer. If you don't have your skills book, there's a document there on the classroom that also has the questions. So you can just answer the questions in your copy. I'd like you to do that for me now, please. Okay, so guys, just to recap, there's 3 plantations. The first one is the Laois Offaly plantation, and that was around 1556. Then there was the Munster plantation, 1586. Okay, so there's a 30-year gap. And then the Ulster plantation in 1610. Okay, so again, girls, there's about 30 years between each of these plantations. Now, they were all planned by Henry, or the whole idea of plantation was planned by Henry VIII, but he had died before he had a chance to put any of these things into practice. But his whole idea of plantation was this idea of surrender and grant. And this is that the Gaelic and the Anglo-Irish lords would give up their land to the king. So they would show their loyalty to the king by giving their land to him. But he would then give the land back to them as almost like a tenant. And with the land, they would also get a title. So they would become the lord of wherever. And they'd be given this title and this prestige, okay? And they had to promise to speak English. They had to promise to use English law and practice English customs. So he wanted to basically make Ireland like England, and he wanted to encourage the important Irish families to show their loyalty to him. Okay. Now, this scheme of surrender and regrant, so giving up your land and then getting it back along with a title, this led to disputes over succession, as now land could be confiscated from a chieftain. Okay, so you remember in the old Irish law, the Brehon law, that the land is shared out amongst the whole family. Okay, then this led to disputes, because if the chief had given over his land to the king, when the chief dies, then who owns the land? Okay, the king owns the land and it can't be given over to the family. So this led to a whole lot of disputes. Okay, and plantation land then was given to loyal settlers, so people who were loyal to the crown. You don't need to take this page down. There's a lot of information there. It's just a bit of background. You don't need to take it down. Okay, so girls, what I would like you to do now is I would like you to fill in the timeline. There's a sheet there on the Google Classroom. And if we were in class, I would have that printed out and you'd fill it in. But otherwise, I just want you to draw out the timeline in your copy and fill in the missing bits. And I'd also like you to look at page 133. And I'd like you to read that in your book. And the next day, then we're going to start on the Ulster plantation. So just to recap, there were three. The idea of plantations came from Henry VIII. The whole idea was to try and make Ireland a lot more English and to stop other countries from using Ireland as a way to attack Britain. And he wanted to do this by sending over loyal people from Britain to come and live in Ireland, and they would get land as a reward for doing so. There was three different plantations. The Laois Offaly, which wasn't a success, the Munster plantation, which was slightly more of a success but still failed in the end, and then the last one was the Ulster plantation, which is what we're going to come to the next day.